And the personal name actually reads as Asherah is my mother, so it's a suggestive identification, which is extremely interesting. The Phoenician Punic goddess Tanit is considered a manifestation of Asherah, is for her part known as mother. So we have this mother goddess symbolism, as well as the etymology and the names, very clearly and powerfully drawn out in the inscriptions that have been archaeologically discovered. The creatress of her children, that is, the gods. This is her name. Asherah bears the epithet Rachme, the one of the womb. Metaphorically, Rachme means the compassionate one. So we have compassion, nurturing, and birthing of the gods, kings, and men in these inscriptional evidences that we have found archaeologically. Asherah is therefore both the dia genetrix and the dia matrix. However, although Rachme expresses her manifestation as genetrix, the Ugaritic texts yield no epithet for Asherah as nutrix. The Phoenician Punic Tanit, however, is known as nutrix. So the reason why this is important is because the epithet of Shadday, the very interesting epithet of Shadday, is read as the one of the breast. This might express the goddess in her manifestation as the day metrix. Rachme and Shadday, genetrix and nutrix, would then be parallel epithets for the goddess in the Hebrew Bible. Isn't that fascinating? Shadday reads as a feminine form would necessarily be early West Semitic, as Asherah is. What is also extremely interesting, she says, is that both the divine name Shadday and the Hebrew theophoric names with the element Shadday can be found in the priestly genealogies of Numbers chapter 1. These are considered, of course, to be pre-Mosaic. The theophoric element Shadday has also been found in a Canaanite name from the 14th to 13th century BCE in an Egyptian context, of all things. So the parallels are really powerful here. Now, Litsky goes on to note on page 21, she says, whether the 40 biblical occurrences of the word Asherah refer exclusively to a cult object or to times of the goddess, this is debated, of course. The cult object, which is a wooden pole or a tree trunk or a living tree carved as a stylized tree or a goddess image or is pruned, this was likely to have existed from the earliest period to the end of the monarchy, that is, to the end of Solomon's temple. Acceptable in official and popular Yahwist religion, this cult Asherah was acceptable, and it was found in temples and country shrines in both the northern and the southern kingdoms, in the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. But whether the Asherah was an object in the cult of Yahweh, or is Asherah, or of Asherah, this is what is debated. The existence of Asherah is not what is debated. The strongest evidence for the cult of Asherah is a 1st millennium BCE Phoenician Punic material that describes there is a continual polemic against the Asherah mounted by the Deuteronomists. Now, the Deuteronomists are those who rewrote the history of Israel after they came back from the Babylonian destruction. And they did not like the Asherah. But they were several hundred years later than when Asherah was worshipped in Solomon's temple. And Raphael Patai, in his book The Hebrew Goddess, discusses this in extensive detail. She was worshipped for hundreds of years in the Solomon temple. Very interesting. And it was widespread by both exilic and post-exilic times. And it's argued whether she was a consort of Yahweh or not. I'm on page, I've got mosquitoes here. Don't want to get West Nile virus. That'd be ugly. Anyway, Asherah was the consort of Yahweh. That's discussed. And in favor of this assumption that Asherah is the consort of Yahweh, she says, the preservation of the material of the high god's consort in the marriage metaphor for Yahweh's relation with Israel and with wisdom. This metaphor of Yahweh being married to Israel, the bridegroom in the New Testament being Christ, the church being his bride, is how the Christian reinterpreted this material. But the metaphor extends because Yahweh was married. And of course then you have the New Testament speculation of Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene, Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, and all the spilled ink on that topic. Oh boy, it's a huge topic. Well, she says inscriptions found at Khirbet El Kom and Kundilat Arjud, dating to the 8th century BC, discuss this Yahweh and his Asherah. The goddess is part of the religion, and she notes that. Imagery on a late 10th century BCE Tanakhic pottery cult stand suggests early Israelite worship of Asherah, possibly as Yahweh's consort. So there's some archaeological evidence for these contentions, definitely. Now there was a cult of the Dea Nutrix, that is, the goddess of the breast. This appears to have been tolerated during the monarchy from roughly 720 to 587 BC. It's likely to have been the cult of Asherah. She says that on page 23 of her study here. This is an old popular tradition, possibly renewed through foreign contact. And then there's various types of evidence that she and William G. Dever have commented on. The sanctuary would have been related to Asherah. There are miniature Asherahs, or Asherim, as the plural indicates, so on and so forth. Now, the allusion to Asherah as Shadday and Rachmeh in Genesis 49, 25, and 26 is what she explores next. And this is a fascinating situation here. The testament of Jacob, that is, the testament found in Genesis 49, in the testamentary literature, a big type of literature that's been discovered through biblical scholarship. And we find this same testamentary literature aspects in the Book of Mormon, with the testament of Lehi, when he gathers his children around and gives them his father's blessing at the end of his life. This is the testamentary literature type that we have found also in the Bible. So in the testament of Jacob, with this archaic poetic language and style, we find the presence of both names, El and Shaddai, but the absence of Elohim and Yahweh, except for the liturgical aside in chapter 5, verse 18. So she says what this does is, what this is showing us is it's reflecting a pre-monarchic oral folk tradition. It's kind of interesting that way. Verse 25, the blessings of breast and womb is what she talks about next. And she says in this particular chapter in the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 49, verse 25, it has demythologized references to Canaanite old gods. The old gods being heaven, the deep, so on and so forth. And perhaps to a goddess identified as Asherah as well. She says the term breasts and womb, Shaddayim and Rechem, form a fixed or a parallel pair found in blessing and cursing in Hosea 9:14. Some scholars read breasts and womb as a demythologized allusion to one goddess. The preceding mention of El, the Canaanite father god, suggests his consort, Asherah. That's fascinating, isn't it? Thus, breast and womb may refer to Asherah. It's definitely associated with goddesses, of course. Later, these references were applied to Yahweh by the later redactors, the Deuteronomists. Originally, it was they knew about this goddess figure. She was basically hidden through translation by the later compilers of the earliest Israelite traditions. And this was after they returned back from Babylon. So isn't that interesting? We don't have the original religion and meaning in our current Old Testament. This is a rewrite job. Fascinating, isn't it? Interesting how they have found, through archaeology and other families of texts, that this is the case. It's so fascinating. The terms may allude to a divine epithet, Rechem, womb, to Rachmeh, the one of the womb, and Shaddayim, the breasts, to Shaddai, the one of the breasts. Thus, the words breasts and womb would allude to the divine epithets Shadday and Rachme. It's